I can still hear it. The silence that filled St. Mary's Chapel that rainy November morning. Not peaceful silence, not respectful silence. The kind of silence that presses down on your chest until you can't breathe. The kind that wraps around your throat like invisible hands. My grandmother, Virginia Holloway, lay in an expensive mahogany coffin at the front of the church, surrounded by white lilies. She would have hated. For 78 years, she had ruled our family with an iron fist disguised as scripture. She shamed, humiliated, and controlled everyone who dared stand in her way. And yet, there I was, Grace Thompson, 29 years old, plain-faced nurse, the family's perpetual disappointment, the only grandchild bold enough, or maybe foolish enough, to stand up and speak. Would anyone like to share some words about Virginia? Pastor Edwards asked, his voice echoing through the chapel. I looked around. My Aunt Diane, Virginia's favorite daughter, stared straight ahead, her face a carefully constructed mask of grief. My cousins studied their shoes. My mother clutched her handkerchief, knuckles white. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and telling. Before I could stop myself, I stood up. My legs trembled beneath my simple black dress, the one Grandma Virginia once called appropriate for someone of your station, Grace. I walked to the podium, feeling dozens of eyes burning into my back. My hands shook as I unfolded my carefully prepared eulogy, but every word was a lie. Virginia Holloway, I began, my voice barely audible at first, was a woman of remarkable strength and unwavering faith. Someone coughed, maybe a laugh, quickly smothered. She devoted her life to her family, I continued, the words like ash in my mouth. Her guidance shaped us all into who we are today. That part, at least, was true. Virginia had shaped us, through criticism, manipulation, and the constant reminder that we would never be good enough. I painted Virginia as a pillar of grace, a saintly matriarch who had devoted her life to love and family. People shifted uncomfortably in their pews. Some avoided my gaze, others smirked at the irony. My hands trembled on the podium, but I forced the words out anyway, as if speaking them could rewrite our history. She taught us the value of perseverance, I said, remembering how she'd mocked my nursing career. She showed us what it means to stand tall in the face of adversity, like when she'd told my cousin Emily that her depression was just attention-seeking behavior. Above all, I concluded, Virginia Holloway leaves behind a legacy of love that will guide our family for generations to come. When I finished, no one clapped. No one said amen, just silence so thick it could choke you. I walked back to my seat, my heart pounding like a drum in my ears. That's when I felt a hand on my shoulder. Samuel Green, my grandmother's longtime lawyer, leaned in. His voice was low, his eyes gleaming with something I didn't understand. Congratulations, he whispered. That was her final test. My jaw dropped. My grandmother was dead. What test could she possibly be giving me? The rest of the service passed, in a blur. I couldn't focus on Pastor Edwards' final prayers or the somber procession to the cemetery. Samuel's words echoed in my head, drowning out everything else. At the graveside, I stood apart from the rest of the family. Rain drizzled down, soaking through my thin jacket. I watched as they lowered Virginia's coffin into the ground, feeling nothing but a strange, hollow relief. Grace, I turned to find Samuel beside me, sheltering us both under a large black umbrella. I need you to come to the reading of the will tomorrow, he said. 10 o'clock sharp. Virginia's house. I don't expect anything, I replied automatically. It was true. Virginia had made it clear throughout her life that I was the least deserving of her descendants. Samuel's smile was enigmatic. Nevertheless, your presence is required. Virginia's specific instructions. As people began to disperse, Aunt Diane approached, her expensive heels sinking slightly into the wet grass. Quite a performance, Grace, she said, voice dripping with disdain. Mother would have appreciated the theatrics, if not the sentiment. I did what no one else was willing to do, I replied quietly. Always the martyr. Diane's perfect red lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I suppose we'll see you tomorrow, though I can't imagine why you'd bother. I thought of Samuel's words, her final test, and met my aunt's gaze. I'll be there. That night, alone in my small apartment above Mrs. Peterson's garage, I sat on my bed and allowed myself to remember. The Christmas when Virginia had compared my homemade gift to my cousin Rebecca's store-bought one. The dinner where she'd announced to everyone that I would have been prettier if I'd tried harder. The time she'd called the hospital where I worked, asking to speak to my supervisor about my concerning behavior. Years of small cruelties and large humiliations, all delivered with a smile and often a Bible verse to justify them. I looked at the eulogy I'd written, now crumpled in my hand. Why had I lied? Why hadn't I told the truth about the woman who had made my life a misery for 29 years? Because somewhere deep inside, I still wanted her approval. Even in death, Virginia Holloway held power over me. I smoothed out the paper and read my own words again. A legacy of love. I laughed bitterly. What legacy had Virginia truly left? Pain? Insecurity? The constant feeling that I would never be good enough? I tossed the eulogy into my small trash can and crawled into bed, not bothering to change out of my funeral clothes. Tomorrow would bring the reading of the will, another performance of family unity that none of us truly felt. As I drifted off to sleep, Samuel's words played again in my mind. That was her final test. What could he possibly have meant? And more importantly, had I passed or failed? The rain continued into the next day, drumming against the roof of my car as I drove to my grandmother's house. I hadn't been there in months, not since Easter, when Virginia had spent dinner questioning my decision to stay single. At your age, Grace, when options are already so limited for someone like you. The house loomed ahead, a Victorian monstrosity that had always felt more like a museum than a home. 3 stories of dark wood and gables, surrounded by a garden Virginia had kept with the same rigid control she applied to her family. Even the flowers seemed to grow in fearful, perfect rows. I parked behind my mother's sensible sedan and sat for a moment, gathering courage. Through the rain-streaked, windshield, I could see shadows moving behind the curtained windows. The family, gathering like vultures. Or maybe that wasn't fair. Perhaps they were just people like me, shaped by Virginia's influence, trying to navigate the complicated emotions that come with losing someone you're supposed to love but might have feared instead. The front door opened before I could knock. Samuel Green stood there, impeccable in a charcoal suit. "Right on time, Grace," he said, ushering me in. "Everyone else is already here." The foyer smelled of lemon polish and the lavender sachets Virginia had always tucked into drawers and cabinets. I handed Samuel my wet umbrella, feeling like an intruder despite having spent countless holidays in this house. "They're in the parlor," Samuel said, guiding me down the hallway. I could hear them before I saw them. The murmur of voices, the clink of coffee cups against saucers. The conversation stopped abruptly when I entered the room. Aunt Diane sat in Virginia's favorite armchair as if already claiming her inheritance. My cousins Rebecca and Emily perched on the sofa, while their brother Michael stood by the fireplace. My mother sat alone in a corner, looking smaller than I remembered. "Grace," Diane said, her tone suggesting both surprise and disappointment that I'd actually shown up. "How dedicated of you to come." "Samuel said grandmother wanted me here," I replied, taking the only remaining seat, a hard-backed chair near the door, positioned as if for a quick escape. "Well, now that everyone is present," Samuel began, opening his briefcase on the antique coffee table, "we can proceed with the reading of Virginia Holloway's last will and testament." I braced myself for the inevitable. Virginia would leave everything to Diane, her perfect daughter who had followed her into the family real estate business and married a prominent local judge. Perhaps small bequests to my cousins. Nothing for my mother, who had disappointed Virginia by marrying my father, a kind but unsuccessful artist. And certainly nothing for me, the perpetual disappointment. "Before I begin," Samuel said, "Virginia left specific instructions that I am to read a letter addressed to her granddaughter, Grace Thompson." The room went silent. 5 pairs of eyes turned to me in various stages of shock and suspicion. "A letter?" Diane's voice was sharp. "For Grace?" Samuel removed an envelope from his briefcase and walked across the room to hand it to me. The paper was heavy, expensive stationery with my name written in Virginia's precise handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Read it aloud," Diane demanded. "The letter is addressed to Grace alone," Samuel countered. Virginia was very clear about that. With shaking fingers, I unfolded the letter and began to read silently. "My dearest Grace, if you are reading this, I have passed from this world and you have attended my funeral. I imagine it was a somber affair, with few willing to speak about me. Our family has never been good at expressing difficult truths. But you, Grace, you have always been different. I have watched you closely all these years. While others in the family sought my approval through flattery or imitation, you maintained your own path. You chose a career of service despite my criticism. You spoke your mind, quietly but firmly, even when it cost you my favor. You may believe I did not love you. The truth is more complicated. I pushed you harder than the others because I saw in you something rare, genuine strength of character, not the brittle pride of Diane or the desperate people-pleasing of your cousins, but true resilience. Everything I did, every harsh word, every criticism, every time I compared you unfavorably to others, was a test. Not out of cruelty, though I know it felt that way. I needed to know if you could endure hardship without becoming hard yourself, if you could face cruelty without becoming cruel. And you did, Grace. You remained kind, despite having every reason not to be. You cared for others even when no one seemed to care for you. You maintained your dignity when it would have been easier to lash out or give up. That was the final test. My funeral. Would you speak the ugly truth about me? Would you stay silent out of fear? Or would you choose grace over vengeance, dignity over revenge? By the time you read this letter, I will know your answer. With love and respect I never properly showed you in life, Virginia Holloway. I looked up from the letter, tears blurring my vision. The room around me seemed to waver, as if the foundations of reality itself were shifting. What does it say? Diane demanded. What game is Mother playing now? I couldn't answer. My throat had closed up and my mind was reeling. Had my grandmother's lifetime of cruelty really been some twisted test? Was this her idea of love, breaking someone down to see if they could survive it? Samuel cleared his throat. If you'll all direct your attention back to me, I'll proceed with the reading of the will itself. He extracted a thick document from his briefcase and adjusted his glasses. I, Virginia Elizabeth Holloway, being of sound, mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. I barely heard the formal opening, still stunned by Virginia's letter. A test. My entire life had been a test. Then Samuel's voice cut through my thoughts, clear and precise. To my granddaughter, Grace Thompson, I leave my entire estate, including this house, my business holdings, and all financial assets. With the following condition, the room erupted. What? Diane shot to her feet. This is absurd. Mother must have been senile, Rebecca exclaimed. Michael swore under his breath. Silence. Samuel's voice cut through the chaos. As I was saying, with the following condition, that she demonstrated in her actions at my funeral the quality of character I have tested throughout her life. He turned to me, his expression solemn. Grace, you delivered a eulogy that portrayed Virginia in a positive light, despite having ample reason to do otherwise. According to the terms of the will, you have fulfilled the condition. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room seemed to spin around me as the implications sank in. This is preposterous, Diane sputtered. I'm contesting this immediately. Mother wasn't in her right mind. I assure you, Samuel replied calmly. Virginia was completely lucid when she made these arrangements, and she anticipated your reaction, Diane. He turned another page. She left a video recording to be played in the event her will was contested. The weight of everything, the letter, the will, my grandmother's bizarre psychological game, crashed down on me all at once. I stood up abruptly. I need some air, I managed to say, then fled from the room, from the house, into the pouring rain. The rain soaked through my clothes as I stood on the porch, gasping for air. Behind me, I could hear raised voices, Diane's shrill with indignation, Samuel's steady and unyielding. The old house seemed to sigh around us, as if it too was weary of family drama. My entire life had been a test. Every criticism, every comparison, every humiliation, all deliberately designed to break me down or build me up. I wasn't sure which. Was this some twisted form of love, or the final manipulation of a woman who couldn't relinquish control even in death? The door opened behind me. I expected Diane, ready to accuse me of conspiracy or manipulation. Instead, my mother stepped out, her face pale but composed. Grace, she said softly, you should come back inside. I can't face them right now, I replied, wiping rain from my face. They think I planned this somehow. She took my hand, an unusual gesture for her. My mother had never been demonstrative, perhaps another side effect of Virginia's influence. Samuel is playing the video, she said. You need to see it. Reluctantly, I followed her back into the house. In the parlor, someone had set up a laptop on the coffee table. The family sat in stunned silence as my grandmother's face filled the screen. Virginia Holloway looked much as she had in life, elegant, severe, with not a hair out of place. But there was something different in her eyes, a vulnerability I'd never witnessed before. "If you're watching this," she began, her voice slightly raspy, "then my will has been contested. I imagine Diane is leading the charge." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Diane, dear, your ambition has always been both your greatest strength and your most obvious weakness." Aunt Diane made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a growl. "I'm in full possession of my faculties," Virginia continued. "Dr. Mercer has provided documentation to that effect, which Samuel will share. I've made this decision with clear intention and after great consideration." She paused, seeming to gather herself. "I've never been an easy woman to love. I know that. My own mother ruled our family with criticism and conditional approval, and I followed her example, believing it was the way to build strong character. I was wrong. I felt as if the floor was tilting beneath me. In 29 years, I had never heard Virginia admit she was wrong about anything. "Grace," she said, seeming to look directly at me through the screen, "has shown me another way. Despite everything I've put her through, she has remained kind, resilient without becoming bitter, strong without becoming cruel." Virginia's composure cracked slightly, her eyes glistening. "The family business needs that kind of strength. Not Diane's ruthlessness or Rebecca's people-pleasing or Michael's recklessness. It needs Grace's quiet integrity." She straightened, regaining her formal demeanor. "So yes, I am leaving everything to Grace, provided she passed my final test. And if you're watching this, she did. She chose dignity over revenge, grace over bitterness, just as she has done her entire life." Virginia leaned closer to the camera. "The rest of you have received my financial support throughout your lives. Private school tuitions, down payments on houses, business investments. Grace has received nothing but criticism. It's time to balance the scales." The video ended, freezing on Virginia's face, those familiar sharp features that had loomed over my childhood, now strangely softened by what looked almost like regret. The silence that followed was profound. No one looked at me. No one spoke. Finally, Samuel closed the laptop. "There you have it," he said. "Virginia's intentions are clear. There are additional documents detailing specific bequests to charity and small personal items to family members, but the bulk of the estate, this house, the business, the investment portfolio, goes to Grace." "This is still wrong," Diane said, but her voice lacked conviction now. "Mother was manipulating all of us. Even at the end, I thought of the letter, tucked safely in my pocket. Had Virginia been manipulating me? Us? Or had she, in her own warped way, been trying to prepare me for something? I need time," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is overwhelming." Samuel nodded. "Of course. The official transfer of assets will take some time anyway. In the meantime, as the new owner, you might want to consider whether you'd like to stay here or maintain your apartment." "Stay here? In this mausoleum of memories?" The thought made me shudder. "I'll keep my apartment for now," I said. As the family began to disperse, Diane, storming out without another word, my cousins following in awkward silence. Samuel handed me a thick folder. "Everything you need to know about your inheritance," he said, "including the access codes to Virginia's home office. There's more she wanted you to see." My mother approached hesitantly. Throughout my childhood, she had been a ghost in her own life, overshadowed by Virginia, never standing up for herself or for me. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Neither do I replied honestly. She nodded, accepting this. "When you're ready to talk, I'll be there." After everyone had gone, I stood alone in Virginia's parlor, surrounded by her things, the antique furniture she polished every Sunday, the family photos arranged to showcase achievements rather than happiness, the bookshelf of leather-bound classics she quoted, but I doubted she'd ever really read. With the folder tucked under my arm, I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, where Virginia's home office was located. I'd rarely been allowed in this room as a child. It was her sanctuary, off-limits to everyone. The key code worked on the first try, 0716, my birthday. The significance wasn't lost on me. Inside, the office was exactly as I remembered from my few glimpses, intimidatingly tidy, with a massive oak desk dominating the space. Bookshelves lined one wall, filing cabinets another. Everything labeled, everything in its place. On the desk sat a single item that seemed out of place in its disorder, a leather-bound journal, open to a page marked with a silk ribbon. I approached cautiously, as, if the book might bite. The handwriting was unmistakably Virginia's, but more rushed than her usual precise script. April 3rd, 2023. Dr. Mercer confirmed today what I've suspected. 6 months, perhaps a year with treatment. I've declined the treatment. What would be the point of extending a life that has, in many ways, been a failure? I look at what I've built. A successful business, yes. A respected position in the community. But my family? Diane is capable but cold, interested only in what I can give her. The grandchildren are weak, shaped by too much privilege and too little challenge. Except Grace. I've been hardest on her because I saw myself in her, not as I am, but as I could have been, should have been, before Mother broke me and remade me in her image. It's too late to change how I've lived, but perhaps not too late to change what I leave behind. I sat down hard in Virginia's chair, the leather creaking beneath me. She had known she was dying, had chosen to die rather than fight. And in her final months, she had orchestrated this elaborate scenario, not just a test for me, but a reckoning for herself. I flipped through more pages, reading snippets of my grandmother's private thoughts. Her disappointment in Diane's calculated ambition, her worry about Rebecca's desperate need for approval, her frustration with Michael's entitlement, and me. Pages about me. Grace visited Mrs. Peterson in the hospital today. She doesn't know I know. Doesn't know I've been keeping tabs on her all these years. That old woman isn't even family, yet Grace sits with her for hours, reading to her, brushing her hair. The kindness I never showed her, she shows to others freely. How is this possible? I closed the journal, overwhelmed. The grandmother I thought I knew, cold, judgmental, cruel, had been watching me with different eyes than I'd ever imagined, seeing strength where I'd felt only inadequacy, admiring kindness I'd offered despite, not because of, her example. The rain had stopped. Outside. Through the window, I could see the garden, still perfect, still rigid in its beauty, like Virginia herself, outwardly flawless, inwardly constrained by rules she'd never questioned until the end. I opened the folder Samuel had given me. Property deeds, bank statements, investment portfolios, the family business, Holloway Real Estate Development, with its dozens of employees and millions in assets. All mine now. But what would I do with it? The next morning, I called in sick to the hospital for the first time in my nursing career. I needed time to process everything that had happened, to decide what to do with this unexpected inheritance that felt as much like a burden as a gift. I drove back to Virginia's house, my house now, though I couldn't think of it that way. The morning light made it look less imposing than it had yesterday, just an old house in need of some care. The garden was beginning to show signs of neglect after just a week without Virginia's attention. Inside, I wandered from room to room, seeing it all with new eyes. The formal dining room where we'd endured countless tense holiday meals, the parlor where Virginia had hosted her church circle, displaying her grandchildren like prized possessions, except for me, usually relegated to helping in the kitchen. I paused at the collection of family photos on the hallway wall. Virginia had arranged them chronologically: Diane's wedding to Judge Henry Crawford, Rebecca's law school graduation, Michael's acceptance to business school. My nursing school graduation photo was there too, smaller than the others and positioned slightly apart. Behind me, the front door opened. I turned, half expecting Diane returning to continue her protests. Instead, I found myself face to face with my cousin Rebecca. The door was unlocked, she said awkwardly. I should have knocked. It's okay, I replied, though I wasn't sure it was. Did you forget something yesterday? Rebecca shook her head. At 34, she was the oldest grandchild, always striving to be perfect in Virginia's eyes. We had never been close. She had followed Virginia's lead in treating me as somehow less than the rest of the family. I came to talk to you, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. About all of this. I led her into the kitchen, the one room in the house that had always felt somewhat comfortable to me. I put on a pot of coffee, a normal action in this most abnormal situation. Are you here on Diane's behalf? I asked as the coffee brewed. Because if she wants to contest the will— I'm not, Rebecca interrupted. Diane and I disagree about how to handle this. She accepted the mug of coffee I offered, wrapping her manicured hands around it as if seeking warmth. I always envied you, she said suddenly. I nearly dropped my own mug. What? Rebecca gave a small, sad laugh. I know, it sounds absurd. You were the one grandmother criticized constantly. but you were also the only one who seemed free. Free? I echoed. Rebecca, I spent my entire life trying to earn her approval. But you lived your own life anyway, she countered. You became a nurse because that's what you wanted to do, not because it would impress grandmother. You stayed kind, even when she was cruel. The rest of us, we shaped our entire lives around her expectations. I thought about that as I sipped my coffee. Had I been free in ways I hadn't recognized? Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Rebecca set down her mug. Because I want you to know that not all of us are like Diane. I don't plan to fight you for the inheritance. And I think grandmother might have made the right choice. Her admission hung in the air between us, surprising us both. Rebecca, I began carefully, what would you have done if you'd been in my position at the funeral? She considered this, then shook her head. I'd have given the same eulogy you did, but for different reasons. You did it out of genuine grace. I'd have done it out of fear. Fear of what people would think if I told the truth. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. I thought about Virginia's journal, about her assessment of each of us. She had seen Rebecca more clearly than I had, a woman shaped by the need for approval, trapped in a role she'd been playing so long she'd forgotten it wasn't real. What will you do with it all? Rebecca asked finally. The business? The house? I don't know yet, I admitted. I'm a nurse, not a real estate developer. I don't know the first thing about running Virginia's empire. You could sell it, she suggested. Walk away with millions and never look back. No one would blame you. It was the obvious solution, the practical one. Take the money and leave behind Virginia's, legacy of ruthless ambition and emotional manipulation. But something about it felt wrong. Too easy, perhaps. Or maybe just too final. I need time to think, I said. Rebecca nodded. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For following grandmother's lead all these years. For not standing up for you when I should have. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received from any member of my family. Before I could respond, Rebecca's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and grimaced. Diane, she explained. She's called an emergency family meeting to discuss legal options. She doesn't believe grandmother was competent when she changed her will. When did she change it? I asked, realizing I'd never thought to ask Samuel. 3 months ago, Rebecca replied, right after her diagnosis. After a moment's hesitation, she added, I won't be attending Diane's meeting, but you should know she's determined to fight this. She feels entitled to the inheritance. After Rebecca left, I returned to Virginia's office, drawn back to the journal. I flipped through it, reading entries from the last year of her life. The picture that emerged was complex. A woman confronting her mortality and, for perhaps the first time, questioning the values that had guided her life. June 17th, 2023. Watched Grace at the hospital today. She didn't see me. I stayed back, observing. The patience she shows with her patients, the genuine care. Where did she learn this? Not from me, certainly. I taught judgment, not compassion. Criticism, not kindness. What might she do with resources? With real power? Diane would use it as I did. To control, to build, to dominate. But Grace? I find myself curious, perhaps even hopeful. I closed the journal, troubled by this glimpse into Virginia's mind. Had her test been genuine remorse? An attempt at redemption? Or just another form of control, reaching beyond the grave to direct our lives? My phone rang, startling me. It was Samuel. Grace, he said without preamble. I thought you should know that your Aunt Diane has contacted me about contesting the will on grounds of undue influence. She's suggesting you somehow manipulated Virginia during her illness. I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. That's absurd. I barely saw Virginia in her final months. She didn't even tell me she was sick. I know that, Samuel replied. And we have documentation of Virginia's mental competence. But Diane is determined. So what happens now? If she pursues this, it could get ugly. Family secrets aired in court, significant legal fees, and regardless of outcome, permanent damage to relationships. I thought of Rebecca's visit, her unexpected apology, of my mother, reaching for my hand on the porch, even of Diane, who despite her ambition and coldness, was still family. There has to be another way, I said. Samuel was quiet for a moment. There might be, he said finally. Virginia left me additional instructions. A letter to be given to you only if the family contested the will. I think it's time you read it. Samuel arrived at the house an hour later, briefcase in hand, expression grave. I met him at the door with a strange sense of déjà vu, as if we were reenacting yesterday's scene with different lines. "This isn't how Virginia wanted things to go," he said as I led him into the kitchen. The formal parlor felt too oppressive for whatever was coming next. Did Virginia ever consider that her manipulations might tear the family apart rather than heal it? I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Samuel set his briefcase on the kitchen table, the solid oak one where I'd sometimes helped Virginia snap beans or roll pie dough during the rare moments when she'd seemed almost human. "Virginia was complicated," he said, selecting his words carefully. "I've been her lawyer for 30 years, and I'm not sure I ever fully understood her. But I do know that in her final months, something changed." He extracted an envelope from his briefcase, cream-colored stationery identical to the first letter. "She predicted this reaction from Diane," Samuel continued. "She knew that despite the video, despite the documented change to her will, Diane would fight." I took the envelope, feeling its weight. "More tests from beyond the grave?" "More truth, I think," Samuel replied. "Virginia asked me to tell you that this letter isn't a test. It's a choice." I opened the envelope, unfolded the letter, and began to read. "My dear Grace, if you're reading this, then Diane has chosen conflict over acceptance, as I feared she would. She is, after all, my daughter, raised to believe that power is something to be seized and held at all costs. I have given you an impossible inheritance, not just material wealth, but the burden of a family broken by my failures. Now I offer you a choice that I myself was never brave enough to make. You can fight Diane in court. With Samuel's help, you would likely win. The legal documentation of my competence is thorough, and my video testimony clear. But victory would come at the cost of whatever fragile family bonds remain. Or you can choose another path." Enclosed with this letter is a second will, legally valid but undated. It divides my estate more conventionally, the business to Diane, who has worked there for 20 years, the house to be sold and proceeds divided among all my descendants. My personal possessions distributed according to sentimental rather than monetary value. If you choose this path, Samuel will file this will as my final testament. No one but the two of you will ever know about the first will or my video explanation. Your test at my funeral becomes merely a kind granddaughter's attempt to bring dignity to a difficult moment. This may seem like another manipulation, Grace. Perhaps it is. But it is also an opportunity for you to demonstrate what I have long suspected, that you understand something about the true value of inheritance, that the rest of our family does not. The choice is entirely yours. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that in my final days, watching you live with such grace despite all I put you through, I felt something I rarely allowed myself to feel. Pride. Virginia. I looked up from the letter to find Samuel watching me, his expression unreadable. "Did you know about this?" I asked. He nodded. "I drafted both wills at Virginia's instruction, the second one just a week before she died." I placed the letter on the table, smoothing it flat. "She's still controlling us, even now." "Perhaps," Samuel conceded, "or perhaps she's giving you the power to decide what kind of legacy she leaves behind." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at Virginia's my garden. The roses needed pruning. The hedges were growing unruly. Without Virginia's strict hand, nature was already beginning to reassert itself, softening the rigid lines she had enforced for decades. "What would you do?" I asked Samuel. He joined me at the window. "It's not my decision to make. But you knew her. Better than any of us, probably." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "Virginia was not a happy woman," he said. Finally, "Successful, yes. Respected, certainly. But not happy. In her final months, I think she began to understand why." The second will sat on the table behind us, offering a simpler path. Diane would get the business she coveted. The house would be sold, giving each of us a substantial sum. The family might fracture, but not shatter completely. "She's asking me to give up millions of dollars," I said, trying to wrap my mind around it. "She's asking you what you value more," Samuel replied. "Money and power, or something else." I thought of my life before yesterday. My small apartment, my nursing job with its modest salary, but profound satisfactions. I'd never wanted Virginia's empire, had never imagined it would be mine. "I need time to think," I said. Samuel nodded. "You have until tomorrow. Diane has scheduled a meeting with her own lawyer for the day after." After he left, I wandered through the house again, touching Virginia's things, the crystal figurines she'd collected, the antique furniture she'd polished every Sunday, the heavy drapes she'd never opened fully because she feared the sun would fade the expensive fabrics. So much wealth, so little joy. I found myself back in Virginia's office, drawn to her desk. I opened a drawer and found it meticulously organized. Pens arranged by color, paper clips in a crystal dish, stamps in a silver holder. Everything perfect, everything controlled. Another drawer held personnel files from the business, performance reviews written in Virginia's sharp hand, most critical, few praising. I recognized some of the names, people, who had worked for Holloway Real Estate Development for decades, their livelihoods dependent on my grandmother's judgment. In the bottom drawer, I found something unexpected. A small wooden box, unpolished and simple, at odds with Virginia's usual taste. I opened it to find a collection of childish treasures. A crayon drawing signed Grace, age 6, a small clay figurine, misshapen but recognizable, as a nurse. A Mother's Day card I'd made for Virginia when I was 10, after my own mother had been too depressed to acknowledge the holiday. Mementos of me, kept private, hidden away in this secret box. I sat back in Virginia's chair, cradling the clay figure I barely remembered making. Had there been more to my grandmother than the tyrant I'd known? Had she treasured these small connections, even as she pushed me away publicly? My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my supervisor from the hospital. "Grace, I know you called in sick, but we have an emergency situation. 3 nurses out with that stomach bug that's going around, and we're dangerously understaffed. I hate to ask, but I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said, already standing. 4 hours later, I was deep into a double shift, moving from room to room on the oncology floor where I'd worked for the past 5 years, checking IV lines, administering medications, holding the hand of Mr. Jenkins as he received his latest round of chemotherapy. "You're an angel, Grace," he told me, his voice weak but his smile genuine. "Don't know how I'd get through this without you." "You're doing all the hard work," I replied, adjusting his blanket. "I'm just here to help." As I continued my rounds, I found myself thinking about Virginia's 2 wills, about choices and values, about what it meant to leave a legacy. By the time my shift ended at midnight, I knew what I had to do. The family gathered in Virginia's parlor the next afternoon, Diane imperious in an expensive suit, Rebecca nervous but composed, Michael uncomfortable but present. My mother sat beside me, her quiet support a new and welcome sensation. Samuel stood by the fireplace, briefcase open on the antique side table. He had agreed to arrange this meeting at my request, though I think he suspected what I was about to do. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I know the past few days have been difficult and surprising for everyone." Diane made a dismissive sound. "If this is some attempt to persuade us to accept Virginia's bizarre decision—" "Please," I interrupted gently. "Let me finish." To my surprise, she fell silent. "I've spent the last 2 days thinking about Virginia's legacy. Not just her money or her business, but what she really leaves behind. A successful company, yes. Material wealth, certainly. But also a family fractured by competition and resentment." I looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes in turn. I don't want that legacy. And I don't think in the end Virginia wanted it either. I nodded to Samuel, who removed a document from his briefcase. The second will. Virginia left a second will, I explained. One that divides her estate more conventionally. The business goes to Diane, who has worked there for 20 years. The house will be sold and the proceeds divided among all Virginia's descendants. Personal possessions distributed by sentimental rather than monetary value. The room went silent. Diane's expression shifted from hostility to confusion. "I don't understand," she said finally. "Why would Mother write 2 different wills?" I chose my next words carefully. I think she was struggling with what kind of legacy she wanted to leave, what values she wanted to reinforce. I didn't mention the test or the video or Virginia's private journal. Those secrets could die with her. "And you're just accepting this? Giving up your inheritance?" Michael asked, disbelief evident in his voice. I smiled. "I'm choosing a different inheritance." Samuel began to distribute copies of the second will. "This document is legally binding," he explained. "It supersedes the previous will and represents Virginia's final wishes." As the family began to read through the document, I watched their reactions. Diane's tension visibly eased as she confirmed that the business would indeed be hers. Rebecca seemed thoughtful. perhaps wondering about her grandmother's change of heart. Michael looked simply relieved that the conflict was resolving. My mother squeezed my hand beneath the table. "There is one condition I'd like to propose," I said once everyone had finished reading. "Not legally binding, but a request." All eyes turned back to me. The business has been profitable under Virginia's leadership, but not always ethical. There are properties in East Portland where tenants have been evicted to make way for luxury developments. There are zoning variances obtained through Virginia's political connections rather than proper channels. Diane's expression hardened. "That's business, Grace. You wouldn't understand." "Maybe not," I conceded. "But I understand people, and I understand that a truly valuable legacy isn't measured in dollars, but in impact." I took a deep breath. "I'm asking that Holloway Real Estate Development establish a charitable foundation, using just 10% of its annual profits, to fund affordable housing initiatives in the communities where the company operates." The request hung in the air. Samuel watched Diane carefully, his expression neutral but his posture alert. "Why should I agree to this?" Diane asked finally. "You're giving up your claim either way." "Because it's the right thing to do," I replied simply. And because I think in her final days, Virginia began to understand that too. Diane studied me for a long moment, calculation evident in her eyes. Then, unexpectedly, she nodded. 10% is excessive. 5% with a cap of $500,000 annually. 7%? No cap, I countered. And the foundation operates independently with its own board. A ghost of a smile crossed Diane's face, recognition of a negotiating skill she hadn't expected from me. "Done," she said, extending her hand. "I'll have the company lawyers draft the agreement." As we shook hands, I felt a weight lifting. Not just the burden of Virginia's inheritance, but the weight of decades spent trying to earn her approval. After the meeting concluded and the family dispersed, Diane already on her phone making plans for the business, Rebecca lingering to offer a quiet, "Thank you," Michael leaving without a backward glance, Samuel approached me. "Virginia would be proud," he said. I considered this. Maybe. Or maybe she'd be disappointed that I didn't fight harder for what she left. "Me?" Samuel shook his head. "I think she knew exactly what you would choose. And I think it's what she hoped for." He handed me a small envelope. "One last thing. Virginia asked me to give you this if you chose the second will." Inside was a key. Old-fashioned, heavy brass. "What does it open?" I asked. "A safe deposit box at First National Bank," Samuel replied. "Box 716. My birthday again." Whatever game Virginia had been playing, she'd played it thoroughly. The next morning, I visited the bank. The manager escorted me to the vault, verified my identification, and left me alone with the safe deposit box. Inside, I found a velvet pouch containing my grandmother's engagement ring, a diamond solitaire I'd always admired as a child, before I understood what Virginia truly was. There was also an envelope containing $250,000 in bearer bonds, and a note in Virginia's handwriting. "For Grace alone, not to be shared or divided. Your inheritance separate from the family's. Use it wisely. V." I sat in the bank's private viewing room, the ring and bonds before me, Virginia's final gift, or perhaps her final test. 3 months passed. Winter settled over Portland, wrapping the city in rain and occasional snow. I continued working at the hospital, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms of caring for patients, even as other aspects of my life transformed completely. Virginia's house sold quickly. A wealthy tech executive from California paid well above asking price, charmed by its historical character. My share of the proceeds, combined with Virginia's secret bequest, meant I no longer needed to work double shifts or worry about making rent. Yet I found myself reluctant to change anything about my professional life. "You could cut back your hours," my supervisor suggested during our quarterly review. "Maybe focus on training new nurses or developing our patient care protocols." I considered it. "I think I'll stay on the floor for now," I replied. "It's where I'm needed most." The truth was, caring directly for patients kept me grounded as the rest of my life shifted in unexpected ways. The family dynamics had changed since Virginia's death and the revelation of the second will. Diane was consumed with running the business, making occasional calls to update me on the new foundation's progress, but otherwise keeping her distance. Rebecca had begun reaching out more. Frequently, tentative lunches, careful conversations about our shared childhood, a slow rebuilding of a relationship that had never really existed before. My mother was the biggest surprise. Freed from Virginia's shadow, she seemed to be awakening from a long sleep. She'd begun painting again, small, luminous watercolors that captured fleeting moments of beauty. She'd joined a community garden. She smiled more. Your father would be proud of you, she told me one evening as we shared dinner in my apartment. He always said you had a strong heart. I barely remembered my father, who had died when I was 8. Virginia had always dismissed him as impractical and irresponsible, a dreamer who couldn't provide properly for his family. What was he really like? I asked. My mother's eyes softened. Kind. So deeply kind. He saw beauty everywhere. In a child's drawing, in a weed growing through a sidewalk crack, in people others overlooked. You have that gift too, Grace. Virginia didn't see it as a gift, I said. No, my mother agreed. She saw it as weakness, just as she saw my depression as weakness after he died. She reached across the table to take my hand. I should have protected you from her. I'm sorry, I didn't. You were struggling yourself, I said, squeezing her hand. And Virginia wasn't easy to stand up to. No, she wasn't, my mother agreed. But you did, in your way. Not by fighting her, but by refusing to become like her. That took courage I didn't have. The next day, I made a decision about Virginia's engagement ring, which had sat untouched in my dresser drawer since I'd retrieved it from the safe deposit box. I took it to a jeweler in downtown Portland, a small shop known for custom work. It's a beautiful piece, the jeweler said, examining the diamond under his loupe. Excellent quality. Are you looking to reset it? Yes, I replied. I'd like to use the stone, but create something completely new. Over the next few weeks, I worked with the jeweler to design a pendant. The diamond now surrounded by smaller stones in a pattern resembling a nurse's caduceus. It was both a reclamation and a transformation, turning Virginia's symbol of status into something meaningful to me. When the pendant was complete, I wore it to work tucked beneath my scrubs, a private reminder that sometimes the most valuable inheritances are the ones we create for ourselves. One rainy afternoon in February, I was leaving the hospital after my shift when I noticed Samuel Green waiting by the entrance, sheltering under a large black umbrella. Samuel, I said, surprised. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, he assured me. I was hoping we could talk. There's a coffee shop across the street. Once settled with steaming mugs before us, Samuel got straight to the point. The Holloway Foundation for Affordable Housing has its first board meeting next week, he said. Diane has been surprisingly committed to the project, hired a respected executive director, allocated the full 7% of profits as promised. That's good to hear, I replied, genuinely pleased. They need one more board member, Samuel continued. Someone with perspective, community connection, a different kind of expertise than the real estate professionals and financial advisors Diane has recruited. I understood immediately. You want me to join the board? I think you'd bring valuable insight, he said. And it would ensure the foundation stays true to its mission rather than becoming a tax write-off or PR exercise for Holloway development. I stirred my coffee, considering. Diane won't be happy. Actually, Samuel said with a slight smile, it was Diane's idea. That shocked me more than anything else that had happened since Virginia's death. Why would she want me involved? Samuel seemed to choose his next words carefully. I think Diane is reevaluating certain things. Your decision to give up the inheritance impressed her, though she'd never admit it directly. And the company's latest project, converting an old warehouse into mixed-income housing, has been surprisingly successful, both financially and in terms of community response. So I'd be what? The conscience of the board? I asked skeptically. You'd be a full voting member with equal say in how the foundation's resources are allocated, Samuel replied. And yes, perhaps a reminder of why the foundation exists in the first place. I thought about it. Working with Diane wouldn't be easy. We'd never see eye to eye on many things. But this foundation, this new legacy emerging from Virginia's complicated one, needed protection and guidance. I'll do it, I said finally. But on one condition. The foundation needs to establish a healthcare component, assistance for residents who can't afford medical care, preventative health programs, maybe even a small clinic eventually. Samuel smiled. I'll convey your condition to Diane. The first board meeting was as tense as I'd expected. Diane ran it efficiently, introducing the executive director, a thoughtful woman named Helen Martinez with extensive nonprofit experience, and outlining the foundation's initial goals. When she introduced me, her tone was professional but cool. Grace brings a healthcare perspective that will be valuable as we consider the holistic needs of the communities we serve, she said, the words clearly rehearsed. After the formal business concluded and the other board members departed, Diane and I found ourselves alone in the conference room. The silence stretched awkwardly between us. "Why did you really want me on this board?" I asked finally. Diane gathered her papers, not meeting my eyes. "The foundation was your idea. It seemed appropriate." "That's not the real reason," I pressed. She looked up then, her expression guarded but not hostile. "Mother's journal," she said. "She left it for me in her office safe. I found it the day after the final will reading." I felt a chill. "You read it?" "Every word." Diane's voice was quiet, "including what she wrote about you. About all of us." I waited, unsure what to say. "She was right about me," Diane continued, surprising me. Ambitious, calculating, cold, following in her footsteps without questioning whether her path led anywhere worth going. "Diane, and she was right about you too," she interrupted. "The strength she saw in you, it's real. Not weakness, as I've always thought. Different from my kind of strength, but real nonetheless." I nodded, accepting this unexpected acknowledgement. "So, the foundation is my attempt to do something different," she admitted. "Not to become a completely different person. I am who I am. But to build something that matters beyond profit, margins, and property values." As I left the Holloway building that day, I realized that Virginia's true legacy wasn't the money or the business or even the foundation. It was this subtle shift in understanding. Diane recognizing value in a different kind of strength. Me recognizing the complexity in someone I'd written off as simply cold and ambitious. Small changes, perhaps, but real ones. The beginning of healing for a family long fractured by Virginia's manipulation and control. That night, I stood by my apartment window, watching rain streak the glass. I touched the diamond pendant at my neck, thinking about transformation, about how sometimes the most valuable things need to be broken down and reshaped to reveal their true worth. "Thank you, Virginia," I whispered to the empty room, "for your final lesson." 1 year to the day after Virginia's funeral, I stood alone in the garden of what had once been her house, now a children's community center, purchased by the Holloway Foundation, and converted into a bright, welcoming space for after-school programs and family support services. The formal rose garden had been replaced with vegetable plots tended by neighborhood children. The rigid hedges had been removed to create an open playground. Virginia would have been appalled by the disorder, the noise, the sheer chaotic joy of it all. Or would she? I thought of her journal, of the woman who had begun questioning her values in her final months. Perhaps she would have understood the beauty in this transformation. "I thought I might find you here," Samuel said, approaching from the side path. In the year since Virginia's death, he had become something of a mentor to me, helping me navigate my new role on the foundation board and offering perspective when family tensions resurfaced. "Just paying my respects," I replied. In my own way. We walked together through the garden, watching children harvest late tomatoes and carrots under the guidance of a patient teacher. "The foundation has done remarkable work this year," Samuel observed. 6 housing projects underway, the community center, the health clinic about to open. The clinic had been my project, a small facility staffed by volunteer doctors and nurses, offering free care to those who couldn't afford it. I'd taken a part-time position there, reducing my hospital hours to divide my time between both worlds. "It's a start," I said. "There's still so much need." "Virginia would be surprised," Samuel mused. "Not just by what you've accomplished, but by how Diane has embraced it." That was perhaps the most unexpected development of the past year. Diane remained Diane, ambitious, demanding, sometimes difficult, but she had channeled some of that drive into the foundation's work, finding unexpected satisfaction in creating something that wasn't just profitable, but meaningful. "I've been meaning to ask you something," I said as we sat on a bench overlooking the children's garden. "That day at the funeral, when you told me I'd passed Virginia's final test, did you know what would happen? What she had planned?" Samuel considered this. "I knew about the 2 wills. I knew about her conditions, but I didn't know what you would choose. Did you think I would keep the inheritance? Fight for it?" "I honestly wasn't sure," he admitted. "Virginia certainly believed you might. She saw great potential in you, both for selflessness and for leadership. She wanted to know which would win out." I thought about that. It wasn't really a choice between selflessness and leadership, though. It was a choice about what kind of leader I wanted to be. Samuel nodded, seemingly pleased with my insight. "And now you lead in your own way. Not from the top of a corporate hierarchy like Virginia or Diane, but from a place of service and compassion. The afternoon sun broke through Portland's persistent clouds, casting golden light across the garden. A small girl approached, offering me a misshapen carrot she had just pulled from the ground. "For you, Nurse Grace," she said proudly. Her name was Lily. Her family had been one of the first to move into the Foundation's initial housing project, where I volunteered at monthly health clinics. "Thank you, Lily," I replied, accepting the gift with appropriate solemnity. "It's perfect." After Lily ran back to join her friends, Samuel turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know, I've often wondered if Virginia regretted her approach in those final months," he said. "The tests, the manipulation, the way she set up her will to create conflict before resolution. I've wondered that too," I admitted, whether she truly changed or whether it was just one final power play. "And what have you concluded?" I thought about Virginia's journal, about the small box of mementos she'd kept hidden, about the private bequest she'd left me. "I think she regretted much, but didn't know how to make amends directly," I said finally. Control was too deeply ingrained in her, but in her own warped way, I think she was trying to create the possibility for something better after she was gone. "And she succeeded," Samuel observed, gesturing to the thriving garden, the laughing children, the community being built. "Not the way she planned, perhaps," I agreed. "But yes, in a way, she succeeded." Later that evening, the family gathered at my apartment for dinner. Not a formal affair like Virginia would have hosted, but a casual potluck. My mother brought her famous lasagna. Rebecca arrived with her new fiancé, a kind-eyed teacher she'd, met after finally leaving the corporate law job that had made her miserable. Even Michael came, somewhat subdued after a year of therapy had helped him begin addressing the entitlement Virginia had fostered in him. Diane was the last to arrive, bringing an expensive bottle of wine and an awkwardness that had diminished over the past year but never completely disappeared. "Nice place," she commented, looking around my apartment. I had moved from Mrs. Peterson's garage to a modest condo, using some of Virginia's bequest but saving most for future security and philanthropic goals. "It suits me," I replied. The dinner was not without tension. Too many years of Virginia's influence couldn't be erased in a single year. But there was also genuine conversation, occasional laughter, and moments of connection that would have been impossible while Virginia was alive. As we finished dessert, Diane unexpectedly raised her glass. "To Virginia," she said. "Who would be horrified by this casual dinner served on mismatched plates?" A startled laugh rippled around the table. "To Virginia," Rebecca added, "who never understood that happiness doesn't require perfection." "To Virginia," Michael contributed, "who taught us what not to do as often as what to do." When it came to my turn, I considered my words carefully. "To Virginia," I said, "who, despite everything, brought us here together. Not as the family she tried to create through control and criticism, but as the family we're choosing to become through forgiveness and understanding." My mother reached for my hand across the table, her eyes bright with tears. "To new beginnings," she added softly. After everyone had left, I stood on my small balcony, watching the city lights shimmer through a light rain. I thought about the year that had passed, about how grief and inheritance and family were all more complicated than I had ever imagined. Virginia's final test hadn't really been at the funeral. It hadn't been, about which will I would choose. The true test, the one that continued daily, was whether I could take the painful legacy she had left and transform it into something healing, not by forgetting the hurt she had caused, not by pretending she had been something she wasn't, but by acknowledging the full, complex truth of who she had been and choosing a different path forward. I touched the diamond. Pendant at my neck, Virginia's stone, reset according to my own design. A fitting metaphor for the inheritance I had ultimately accepted. Not the money or the property or the power, but the opportunity to rewrite a legacy of control into one of compassion. The work wasn't finished. The foundation was still finding its way. The family was still healing, still learning how to relate to each other, without Virginia's manipulative presence dictating every interaction. But for the first time in my life, I felt truly free of my grandmother's influence, not because I had rejected everything she was, but because I had found the wisdom to distinguish between the valuable and the toxic in what she had left behind. In her journal's final entry, written just days before her death, Virginia had, written, "I wonder if Grace will understand what I've been trying to do. If she'll see that my greatest failure was not in being too harsh, but in never finding the courage to be gentle. with myself or anyone else. Standing under the quiet rain, I whispered into the night, I understand now, Virginia, and I choose gentleness. I choose grace. It felt like the truest eulogy I could offer, not the fake, glowing tribute I delivered at her funeral, but this private acknowledgement of both her failure and her final, flawed attempt at redemption. The rain grew heavier, washing away the last traces of the day. I went inside, closing the door on the past and stepping fully into the future I was creating. A future built not on Virginia's conditional love or rigid control, but on the simple, powerful grace of letting go.